Hello and welcome to Your Average Bear Gaming. I'm George. Today we're going to do the Cadian Command Squad. It's the last kit in the Imperial Guard Bastion Platoon. Pretty excited. The models turned out alright. Just don't look at the flag. The flag. Let's check it out. Here's the command squad. It's primed, and it was a pretty decent build. It was fairly easy. Only a decent amount of mold lines and flashing and whatnot, and so I scraped that off as best I could. There's a couple of places that I couldn't really reach just because of the shape of the part that it was on, but that's fairly standard for Imperial Guard, Astra Miilitarum troop choices, or, infantry models anyway, that are not vehicles. And so I haven't heard great things about deploying these guys on the tabletop, but that's really kind of not what this channel is about anyway. I'm not really about game playing. It's about taking your models and making them pretty in the easiest way possible. And so the way I've built these out is I've chosen kind of the rule of cool for the most part. Yeah, so I favored stuff like plasma weapons. I don't really know what the role of this unit would be in an actual tabletop, so I focused on kind of survivability and on utility. Specifically, I made sure that there was comms, so there's a comms guy included in this kit. There's a standard, I don't know, maybe it gives some kind of buffs or something like that, and then otherwise I focused on plasma weapons because Imperial Guard troops typically don't have a ton of punch in their arsenal. Otherwise that's kind of it. There's plenty of neat options in this kit, including there's this bandaged arm I think is really neat, and it requires just a little bit of change on how you typically, or at least how I typically assemble these. So I don't assemble them fully before I paint because I want to make sure that I can get into all the things. But this one, actually, the head goes on after the arm because of there's this arm sling that's attached around the neck of the Imperial Guard trooper. This one's the medic. I thought it was a really cool pose. So I went ahead and glued the arm down, even though I will probably regret it later. So that's kind of all I've got to say about the build. Pretty straightforward. I don't have any of the bits and pieces that to kind of customize the heads or whatever. So I didn't do any of that. Mostly I just wanted to get this last kit of the Bastion Platoon painted and squared away. And so this kind of shows you how I've primed them. I've gone back to Army Painter, Skeleton Bone, just because I wanted the command squad to look as good as it possibly can. And while I am pretty happy with at least one of the other alternative primers that I've been playing with, this one gives me the most consistent results. It's the one I've used the most, and so I'm the most comfortable with it. If I want to have reliable results, this is what I'm going to go with. I'm still going to experiment with the other primers, but for now I will be conservative on this kit. So for these Kadeem Troopers, what I've done is I've glued the bodies together, so the head, the chest, and the legs. I've posed them basically in how they're going to go, so I've glued them down, and I made sure that the arms, for the most part, are primed separately. So you'll see my painting paddle has the trooper glued up and primed, and his arms, they're primed separately. And so once I finish painting the body and most of the arms, I'll go ahead and glue the the right set of arms to the right model. And you'll notice here the Vox caster is also by itself. That's to help me make sure to paint the back of the trooper without interference. So I'm going to put these together in the way they're going to end up. So here's the plan. This is what they are going to end up looking like for the most part in terms of a pose. I've got what looks like this is supposed to be a medic. And apparently what makes him a medic is that's a medipack. And now that I think about it, he needs a las gun on his back, so I'll add that before this whole thing is done. Kind of like this guy. So this is the standard bearer. And I chose this pose because it looked pretty interesting. It looks like he's planting the standard somewhere, and he's the injured guy. So his las gun is on his back, so he could still use it if he needed to, somehow. Here is, I guess, is the commander or whatever the officer is. He's got a plasma pistol, and he's got that little riding crop or that baton, whatever, under his armpit. I think it's a really cool pose. Here is the special weapons guy. He's a plasma gunner. I chose one of the alternative heads, so it looks like he's kind of a special dude. And finally, the Vox caster with his las gun kind of slung under his arm. He's got his right hand cupped over his ear in the universal symbol of, hang on, I'm getting a call, please don't interrupt. And then the backpack is on his back. So the plan is to basically replicate my previous color scheme on these guys. So I'll take these off. So that means that the tunic is going to be my Darkstone, which is this guy from Army Painter, Darkstone. It's going to be a glaze as per usual. The only one that's going to be different is going to be this officer. For the officer, I'm going to invert the colors, and I'll show you what I mean when I get there. So I'm going to start by applying the glaze on these troopers. I thought I'd share a few observations on painting these guys, and these will apply to Imperial Guard troops kind of in general. And so the first one of these things that I want to point out is when you're adding the first layer of paint, let's just say you're painting it a bit like me, where the tunic is one color and the carapace is another color, then, this is relatively easy, right? You just kind of slop your base or your glaze all over this part of the model, and I generally use a slightly wider, a bigger brush now to make sure it's kind of efficient. I get it all in there, and that'll be fine. But typically, the brush is too big to get into that little neck slot, which is the same color as the tunic. At least for me, you can do this a little differently. So I usually batch paint these guys. So I paint all of the tunics first. And by the time I'm done painting the tunics, then I'll go back to the neck, and I'll use a smaller brush because I'm using a wider brush here and a smaller brush there. And so by the time that I'm getting to these neck these necks, the tunics are not all the way dry, but they're mostly dry. And this is also a good time to get underneath the helmet. So depending on how you pose the models and what heads you choose, there's going to be this gap between the helmet and the carapace. And so if you've glued the head on like I did, then you need to get in there with a really tiny little brush and get some kind of paint there. You could just foreseeably leave them as your prime color, but you know, for me, I kind of wanted it to look like the shirt underneath the carapace is this undershirt, and it goes up to the neck basically. So when I can, I get in there and paint that little gap between the head and the chest. It's really hard, and so this is one of those cases where if you want to get it absolutely right, you can don't glue the head onto the chest piece, but it's more efficient overall for me anyway to just glue this together and get in there with a tiny little brush. It's not a lot of painting, so your mileage may vary. The other thing that's interesting about this, and this applies to all the Cadians that I've seen so far, and it's for some reason really hard for me to focus on this. Let me see. There we go. I'll get in there right. And so when you're painting this area, you kind of have to decide where the Carapace armor starts and where the tunic starts. So there's, on some of these models, in fact, I got this one wrong. So you'll see how this is the Carapace. This right there is a flat slab. That looks like Carapace. How about that one right there? Is that Carapace? And it's not always clear. And I think that it's not Carapace. I think it's part of the tunic. Now, this may not be a big deal for you, depending on how you approach this, but the important thing is really that you make the decision, is that third thing a slab? So in other words, does the Carapace start here or does it start there? And depending on what you decide, just make sure that you apply the same decision rule to all your models. It'll make sense. This method will make more sense, I think, for the most part. But sometimes it makes sense to go all three. But if you want to keep them consistent, you just want to pay attention to that decision rule. Yeah. It's not a big deal. It's just one of those little things that I not grappled with, but I had to decide every time I've done this. And so now I realize that's the trick, or that's a trick to making, to getting consistent results with the painting process for these models. So just some food for thought. I did your baste, and everything looks like it should. I have the leather brown for the boots. I have the dark stone for the tunic and the skeleton bone for the armor. And I've even mixed up a couple of different shades of kind of a fleshy thing for the faces. They look pretty decent for this stage of the game. I also did their arms, and so the gloves are also leather, and any straps are leather as well. The only difference here was for this wounded guy, I gave him kind of white bandages and a green strap, a sling for his arm to immobilize it. I figured it would be like kind of standard issue, so with green rather than the leather brown, since I figured that would feel a bit more expensive. And I like the splash of color. Who am I kidding? The only kind of thing that was different, well, there's two models that were substantially different from the rest, and that was this was a commander. I don't actually know his formal rank, but he's got black boots, and his pants are one color. His tunic is that dark stone, and there's a little plaque on his chest here that denotes him as an officer or what have you. That's got the black metal. That's a black undercoat. I'm gonna add some metal color to that and to the chain on the back of his body. And so the only other thing that was different was the medic. This is the first medic I've ever painted, and I almost forgot he was a medic. But so I added a white helmet to kind of mark him out as a medic, and his arms have a single white pauldron, so he's easily visible in the battlefield as a medic. And this thing is supposed to be his med kit. I have no idea what that would look like. It looks like orders. In fact, that same arm was in the Wyvern kit, I think it looked like, I don't know, it looked like a map for coordinates, but I guess here it's called a med kit. It looks like a piece of paper, really, but I'm gonna make it a pouch of like a med kit. Maybe it's gauze or something, and so I went with white on that. I don't know. I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do with that, but in any case, that's it. There is actually one more thing that's different, and have really little concept of what I'm going to do with it, except for this standard. It's a big old flag. I went with a white background, and I'm going to add detail to that in the detail phase. We're not there yet, though. We're not there yet, and it's actually really heavy, and so my little sticky tack glob does a really poor job of keeping it in place. So it keeps falling off. I may have to put it on a stick by itself. So there are my dudes. They're ready for the next phase. And if you've ever seen me do one of these videos, you know that the next phase is the glaze. So I'm going to start with the tunics, and the tunic is pretty dark brown. So I've mixed up a bit of this stuff. It's the dark tone, and by mixing it up, I mean I diluted it a bit. I added some water because I do want the dark tone, but I don't want it to darken up my model too much. And this kind of mixture has worked well in the past, so I'm gonna do it this way, so that I get kind of the pooling that I want without excessive darkening of the uniform. All right, I'm gonna hit all of these tunics with the same color, and on any of the skeleton bone, so the Carapace Armor, I'm going to go with a similar treatment, but instead of using the dark tone, I'm going to use the soft tone. It's a much lighter brown. I've also mixed that in with some water, so it's not very dark. Now, the soft tone is actually a very soft, so I may not have needed to dilute that anymore. But I wanted to play with the properties, the pooling properties a little bit. I wanted to make it a little less thick, because in the past I've had a situation where there was just too much, and so I want to tone that down a bit. And I noticed I got a little spill. I could clean it up with some water. No big deal. No harm. No foul. His hat's going to get the same treatment. Now you'll notice that I'm skipping this neck piece, and I'm not skipping it forever. I'm just skipping it for right now because I'm using kind of a larger brush for this application. It's a nice generous area on the model, and I don't want to use this same brush for that area. It's a great way to get overspill and stuff like that. So once I'm done with the tunics, I'll grab a smaller brush and add that little piece right there. And I don't know what I'm going to do with the helmet. I mean, obviously it's going to need a wash, but I don't know what color to use for the wash. If I use a dark tone like I'm using for the tunic, it's going to be really gray and really kind of dirty looking, and that's really not the look I want. I'm wondering if I'm going to need to custom mix some kind of color, some kind of wash for that. I don't know what I'm going to do for that. When I figure it out, I'll show you the end results and explain what I did. Hopefully it doesn't look too bad. So here are my boys. They've got the dark wash on them, and I think it looks pretty good. I think my technique of watering it down is giving me results that I'm hoping for, because I've got nice shadows, but it's not gloopy the way my previous models were. So I'm going to do the same thing with the skeleton bone portions of that armor. There's not a lot, but it is the piece that's almost more visible than anything else. And so we'll go in and just give him a nice little rub with the wash. Yeah, I don't know why I hadn't tried watering down the wash before, but I think I'm happy with the way its properties afterwards. It's giving me the nice tinting that I'm looking for, and it's giving me the nice pooling in the areas I'm looking for, but it isn't extra gloopy the way I've seen in the past. So, cool deal. I'm going to do the same thing to the boots. So this is a case where the skeleton bone painted parts and the leather painted parts get the same wash. It's not as the pooling effect isn't as pronounced. It's more subtle, but I think I like it. So I'm going to do that to all of my models, plus the shoulder pads here. And in this case, I've got a strap, leather strap for the weapon. That gets a nice coating of wash, as do the gloves. And I really like the way the wash works on the gloves. It's probably the best place to use it, because otherwise you have to highlight all that stuff manually, and man, who's got time for that? It's got a nice little effect on the shoulder pads. I will take it. Let's do the rest of these. And as you're using this wash, since it's a mixed, in fact really even if it's not mixed, you want to stir it up pretty frequently to make sure that the pigments in the paint, they don't settle in weird places, so you get a nice consistent wash every time you apply it. And one of the things you got to be careful with this type of model is you want to make sure to get the wash on the underside of your pauldron to make sure that it has the same color kind of all the way around. It's one of those areas that's easy to neglect, but you really don't want to neglect it. So here's what they look like dry, and I think it dried a little too light. I might have watered it down a little too much. So I think it might be a good idea to go ahead and give it another coat and remix my soft tone a bit. Basically, dilute it a little less. And hope I didn't go too far the other way. So I'm going to reapply, but I'm getting to that point on this model, on these models, where I have to start thinking about detailing. So that should be interesting. Yeah, right away you can tell a difference, and it's going to, obviously dry a little lighter than that, but I do want a little bit more of a shadow highlight, basically a contrast between the recesses and the not recesses. I don't know what you'd call that. And I'll hit the boots as well. I should point out that I've realized I made a mistake. This wash that I thought I remixed, I actually did the wrong one. Instead of adding more wash to my soft tone that I had thinned out, I actually added the soft tone to my face wash, which is kind of the same thing, but it's got a hint of red in it, and it's not as diluted as I would have liked. But, you know, it doesn't look bad. At the end of the day, it kind of doesn't matter all that much. The difference between one wash or the other, I mean, had I used, you know, dark tone, I think the difference would have been obvious immediately. But since this is it's a pretty inconsequential mistake, I'm going to keep it. It's going to be fine. Just goes to show that happy little accidents, even if they're always happy, they're not, you know, the end of the world. It's fine. Okay, these are dry, and I've decided, since I wasn't sure what to do with the medic's helmet, I just gave him a really watered down red wash. Maybe, I don't know, hoping that, you know, he still has a wash, and he's got some shadows and highlights. It still reads as mostly white, but there's a little bit of red in there. You know, the red and white medic thing. I don't know. I just went with it. It's time now for details. And so I'm just going to kind of fast forward through these, but I'm going to pick out each one in case you're interested. So first of these is the belt. Each one of these is going to get a black belt with a small brush, and the paint not too watered down because I don't want it running everywhere. And that will include the belt buckle, because the belt buckle, once the belt is dry, is going to get a nice little silver touch just to make it pop. Boom, belt. You know, and as long as I'm at it, I'll go ahead and overbrush the Aquila on the armor. I don't want to actually paint it because it'll run all over this armor, but just a hint of black on it will tell people, or it'll read as if it's actually black, while also minimizing the capacity or the opportunity for mistakes. Next detail on this Vox operator, gonna add a little green to the stuff on his helmet. And hit it with that wash leader. Just gotta be careful. And I'll get this little unit in the back as well, mostly just to give the model some additional color. And that little detail I'll add to every one of these that has a helmet. Obligatory plasma weapon. There's two of these in this group. And so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little dry brushing on the ridges over the blue. I want to just get little bumps. And it's not going to look like this at the end. I want to emphasize those ridges so that I can do something else to kind of enhance the glowiness of it. But to do that, I got to make sure that the ridges stick out. And I'll do the same thing to the plasma pistol. Right here. It's a very subtle thing, but you know, as long as you're here. So those are the main details. There's a couple of other little things that I need to do, like maybe adding some of these tools, like on this pauldron. Do something interesting with the Achilles on the weapons, but there's not a ton of details. So I'm going to handle those off camera, except for the one major detail, which is well, this flag. I don't know. I'm just going to pick some colors and do my best on that. But the important bits are going to be things like this. And so I'll just prime them, green them up. I do these separately because it's harder to do a good job when they're all attached to the models. Now that these plasma weapons are dry, you see that little dry brush of white over that blue? I'm going to go over that with some blue tone, and that has usually done a good job of representing kind of a plasma glow without actually having to do any airbrushing, because, you know, I don't have an airbrush, and there's a decent chance that neither do you. So, with a little bit of blue tone, that combination kind of shows up as a glow. It dries a little different, but it's still better than just leaving it kind of a flat blue. And since plasma weapons are so rare, and this is such a quick detail, I find it's usually worthwhile just taking the time. It's less than a minute. And it leaves behind a pretty cool effect. I like it. Predictably, this flag came out about as atrocious as I expected. This is just not my strong suit. There's a lot of kind of detail work. It requires a steady hand or something, I don't know. So I did my best. I picked a couple of colors, mostly because I wanted them to be bright and stand out from the white background. And so there's some red wings, some blue ribbons, purple horseshoes, well, I don't know, whatever. But anyway, the flag is quote-unquote done. That's unfortunately probably about as good as it's going to get. So I'm not going to spend much more time on this. I'll still have to paint the kind of the handle. I'll probably do a wooden stock thing, and I want to do something kind of like what I did with this officer. Basically, I wanted to represent that stick, that staff, cane, whatever. I wanted to represent it as wood, but with a sheen of like a redwood, like a cherry baton or something like that. So I just went with some leather brown all over the thing. When it dried, I went over it with a very thick wash of red tone to kind of give it the hint of red that I was chasing, and I think it looks okay. Yeah, but most of the details are done. What I want to focus on next are these guys. So this is where most of the detail for these models is going to come from. Not that the models are bland, but there's not a lot going on. It's mostly tunic and carapace armor. So here is where they're going to stand out. This is, like I said, I think it's the most important part of these Imperial Guard models. So I'm going to do a couple of things here. Probably the most important is to pick out those parts that are probably going to be leather. So the scabbard for their combat knife is leather, as is this little strap that the combat knife, that they use to kind of keep it on in the scabbard. And I want to paint both sides because sometimes the underside is visible once you glue it on the model, so make sure you get that. Also, there's there's these little flaps on that canteen, so you want to make sure to get those. They don't necessarily have to be leather. Heck, they don't even have to be a different color. But I mostly pick them out because it gives us another opportunity to bring color into the mix here, which is, I think, sorely needed for these Imperial Guard troops. There's a couple of other little details. So the grip on the knife, I'm going to use a slightly different color. I'm going to use the bone white, just to kind of show it's a different kind of leather, I guess. But I won't go in there until this leather brown is nice and dry. So I'll do that to all of these little equipment pouches, which, by the way, I painted my usual green, and I added, once that dried, my usual green tone. It gives them that nice feeling of depth and detail. I did that off camera because it's kind of my go-to move for these little details. If you've seen any of my other Astra Miilitarum videos, you've seen me do that before, so I'm not going to belabor that point. I just wanted to show you that these are important. Yeah, and if you can get to the back side of the canteen, so this is the combat knife. It's bigger than the others. I am assuming this is going to be for the officer. That's at least how I'm going to use it. So it's a bigger, wider knife than you see here. So you see it's pretty different. But sometimes you can see the back side of the canteen. Make sure to hit that as well. Once I'm done with this stage, I'm going to go in and add a little bit of black detail to some of this equipment. So here, for example, that little box there on that side, that looks like maybe, I don't know, a power pack for the las guns. So I'm going to pick out some of that detail in black so I can go and make it metallic, just to give me some variety in color. And finally, this guy right here is quite a bit different from the rest. This is a different kind of pouch than we've seen before. This looks more like a leather pouch to me, so I'm just gonna make those leathery. And once this layer dries, I'll go back and add the appropriate washes to it to make sure they stand out and look as awesome as it can possibly be. Great googly moogly. There were so many details to this kit, I didn't realize how long it would take me. Been working on the detailing for a little bit now, and every time I look at a new piece, or I think I'm finished with it, there's a new little detail to paint. Holy cow. But this is the last of it. I am applying a wash over each of these little pouches on the medic's little pouch here, little bag. This is his backpack. And that should be the last detail. Oh, you know what? I lied. There is one more detail, and so this guy's the standard bearer. Again, pardon the horrible looking flag. I did my best. It was pretty bad. But he's got a stogie in his mouth, and I would be criminally negligent if I left said stogie unlit. There it is. Medic. He's trying to get some cancer, which I guess in his line of work is probably the least of his worries. But he's done. along with all these other dudes. And they're shedding they're shedding equipment, so I have to re-glue some stuff. But they're done. They're done, they're based and detailed. And I'll review them here in a sec. I'm gonna re-glue some of these things that are falling off. You know, when you assemble after you paint, the super glue can be a hit or miss affair. So I have to kind of redo some of these. But once that's done, I'm going to give them a coat of flat glaze. And then I'll show you each of these and talk a little bit about the details and about the painting involved. It was a neat project. And I'm finally done. They're all done. The Cadian Command Squad. Oh, you want to see the actual models, right? Yeah, sorry, I forgot what I was doing. Here they are. These are my new dudes. They look pretty decent. I am pretty happy with the way they turned out. Except for maybe the medic. Here, I'll show you each of these, just kind of see, so you can see what I'm talking about. We'll start with the medic. There he is. I'll start with the pluses. I mean, his main body, everything is pretty good. I'm really digging the equipment pack that he's got. I hadn't seen that before, so that's kind of a new little layer of detail. He's kind of bristling with equipment. All those little details really make him pop. I'm a huge fan of the way he turned out, for the most part. What I'm not a fan of is really his pink helmet and right pauldron. I was thinking it was going to be a bit more red than it turned out. Maybe I should have stuck with white. I don't know. But you know what? He's fine. He's the first medic that I've ever done for my Astra Miilitarum. I think I'll keep him. The other thing is, I wasn't sure what to do about that little like map / medkit thing, so I just left it white. I have very few things that are white in any of the armies I've built so far, so yeah, it's fine. I'm even happy with the overbrushing detail I did there on the pack. The pack has the caduceus symbol kind of to point out this is for a medic, and I was able to overbrush it in white, and I'm pretty happy with that result. So, you know, I'll take an 8 out of 10. Sounds reasonable to me. How about this commo guy, this communications dude? I kind of really liked him. He turned out pretty good. So I gave him the helmet. It's got like a breather. I thought it was more of a communications thing. It's got the little camera there on the side of his helmet. But then I noticed that the helmet, and this is a detail I hadn't noticed before. I don't know if it's unique to this kit or what have you, but there's a little emblem up top, and you probably can't make it out on the camera because it won't focus that far in. You know what? Let me see. So there he is. There's that little icon on his helmet. It looks to me more like a special weapons guy, and it makes sense that a special weapons guy would have a rebreather. Oh well, wrong helmet, wrong dude. I can live with it. But he's got plenty of gear on him, plenty of little details, and as I was assembling him for what I thought was the final assembly, after I thought he was all painted, I kept noticing little details, and I thought, oh, I have to go back and do this. So one of those that I forgot to the very end is this little kit of equipment on his right pauldron. They look like wire cutters or some pouches or whatever, so I made sure to paint that and give it a nice wash so it matches the other equipment. There's lots of things happening here on the commo pack, so all that needed its own little paint. And he even had the extra little equipment pack underneath that commo pack. Probably wasn't strictly necessary, but I had already painted it, so, you know, on it went. It was kind of a tight fit, but otherwise, yeah, I'm pretty happy with the way he looks. We've got our special weapons dude, and I chose to give him the heavy plasma, and I think it looks pretty neat. One of those little details that I hadn't noticed until I was almost done is the pauldron has a little emblem to kind of signify him as a special weapons guy. And so I gave him, I kind of painted that up to kind of match the plasma. I figured if he was a flamer, I'd give him kind of a red arm or the red emblem. I'm not sure what I would have done if I had equipped him with a grenade launcher. So it didn't come up. But, yeah, I'm pretty happy with him. I thought this was pretty cool. He's got some wicked shades. So I silvered them up for maximum coolness. Oh yeah. Digging the equipment belt that he's got there with one grenade and a couple of pouches. I figured that's where some mags for this plasma weapon might go. Yeah, pretty neat. Next up is my standard bearer, holding this horribly painted standard. I am pretty embarrassed about the quality of it. I was kind of hoping to make up for the lack of quality with childish brightness. It's probably the brightest color I have on any of my Astra Miilitarum troops. You know, there was an attempt. What can I say? I really liked the rest of him, though. I love that little sling detail. I love that little wrap on his arm. I gave him a las gun strapped to his back, and because he didn't really have room for the equipment belt, I just stuck a combat blade to the back, to his back. So it's kind of a small the back draw. Figure he can take his good arm, reach across his body, pull it out if he ever needs it. But yeah, it was a cool little detail, and I am actually pretty happy with his pose. I gave him the kind of kneeling legs. You get one of those in the kit, and I chose him because I wanted him to have this Iwo Jima moment where he's planting the flag, but that staff is so long, I thought, you know what, it would be great to have some elevation on this model, and so he's kind of stabbing it into the ground below him, and so I think it works. I think it works all right. The problem is he's really heavy, so you'll notice the model is pretty far back on his base because I wanted to make sure the staff or the flagpole was also kind of in the base, and so there's all this weight, kind of behind the center of gravity, which means when you put it down, it'll just tip over immediately. So I heard about this little trick on YouTube. People used to glue nickels to their bases to make sure that the models don't tip over, and I thought it was a pretty neat idea. I don't usually do this, but for this model I thought it was good, and it does. It keeps it stable, keeps it from tipping over. Without that nickel glued to the bottom, then it would just constantly be flipping back, and I'd have to rethink the basing, and who's got time for that? Feels like a shame to spend the metal, like in terms of sustainability, but who am I kidding? This hobby is all about plastics. It's as sustainable as a diesel-powered calculator. So, anywho, there he is. And by the way, maybe I'm doing something wrong, but super glue and the nickel just don't mix. It didn't really want to stick, so I had to do some sticky tack, and so that's actually how that's on there. Obviously not permanent, but it's as good as that's going to get. Finally, we have the company commander. That looks a little commissary to me. I don't know on my camera, it just hates focusing on the model. Let me get my face out of the frame. So there he is. with this plasma pistol, and I stole this idea from a sergeant I had done previously. I stuck some grenades on one of his shoulder pads just to kind of make him look awesome and to keep that utility thing off of his back. He's got a special one here. There's a big old combat blade. It's nice and chunky. Yeah, I like the way he looks. He's got some suaveness happening, and I'm kind of a fan. The last thing I'll talk about is the bases. The bases, I made these with some air-dried clay. I made a batch of air-dried clay, and I kind of made sheets. I did a previous video on how to make a bunch of these, and so I just broke off some of the sheets and put them on here. You'll notice that hexagonal pattern, and I got that. I had this trivet. It's this square of silicone that you use to, you put your hot pots and pans on it to keep it from burning your table or your counters, and it has this hexagonal pattern, and I thought, oh, wouldn't that be neat? And so I pressed that hexagonal pattern into the air-dry clay before it dried, and then I let it dry, and I think it gives it an interesting look. And then so I mixed and matched for all of these with that hexagonal pattern, and then just like kind of standard concrete. Made sure there were different colors so that it represents different, structural elements. And I filled it in with some gravel, and then the obligatory grass tuft. And so since I usually put the grass tufts on the interface between the rock and not rock, it was a really tight fit. I didn't want to put the grass tuft on the rock or this hexagonal thing itself. So that left me with very little room to add it. But yeah, pretty happy with this dude. He's going to be a good commander for my Imperial Guard army. And with that, my journey with the Imperial Guard, Astra Miilitarum, it's done. I've completed this kit. It's the last kit that was included in this guy, the Bastion Platoon. It's done. Empty. And so, perhaps the most satisfying part of this entire process is that this box, it goes into the recycling bin, never to be seen again. I am not a pack rat. I don't keep a bunch of this stuff. I don't have a bunch of boxes lying around because I live in an apartment and I just don't have the room. And also, it's just a box. If I kept this just means I'm throwing it away a couple of years from now. So, let's just do it now.